All right. We are live.
We are live. The Hunt for Success podcast number 24 on the 24th. Andrew, we planned that?
Yeah.
Pat Stone is with us today. Before we get going, it's always hard when you start these podcasts because especially when we have somebody on that we haven't met or don't know very well, it's almost like we need to start it the second they walk in because the conversation already started off good today. The Hunt for Success podcast.com, YouTube, subscribe, share, The Hunt for Success, Instagram, and Facebook.
Yes, please.
Did I cover them all?
Yep.
All right. So we were talking a little bit about the podcast and why we did it, and Noah and I went fishing last week and talked about polarization a lot. So in our practice, our mortgage practices, we're very careful to not polarize ourselves. And you asked, politically or how. Anyway, we don't want to polarize ourselves with politics or maybe stuff that we do outside of our work, like hunting, fishing, that kind of stuff that would polarize the people we do business with. We want to do business with everybody and want them to feel comfortable. So one of the topics that's come up on this podcast a lot is maybe it's not a bad idea to polarize yourself. You might not attract everybody by doing that, but you might attract a smaller group more. And so one of the reasons we do the podcast in this venue is because we have access to it, and it's a killer venue, but also it gives us a chance to express ourselves a little bit outside of our business and with the interests we have. So we're not too worried. It's kind of a separate deal. So does that,
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused by the term polarized because we typically use it in reference to political beliefs. And we have a two-party system in this country, and recently polarization usually means you're leaning towards one political party or the other without regard to the underlying rationale for a decision or the belief. I think what if I understand you correctly, what you're really saying is that you believe that it is sometimes good to identify with a perspective and articulate that perspective to get some sort of not empathy or understanding from the participants that you're talking to. And I would agree with that. I frequently articulate or acknowledge people's beliefs, even though I may not subscribe to their entire perspective. I do that because everybody has a brain, everybody's intelligent. I've learned as much from people that are uneducated as I have from people with doctorates. So everybody has something worth hearing, and I think if you don't take the time to acknowledge that they have something worth hearing, you short-circuit yourself. You eliminate a lot of potential knowledge.
But do you think that as a society we've lost the ability to do that? Because not everybody can do that, right? So I would be nervous. I think politics is a great example. I don't do a lot of Facebooking, but I know a lot of people that do, and there's people in our industry that are very vocal on their politics on the internet, but their audience that whole audience doesn't think like that, right?
I would suggest to you that most people do. I would suggest to you that if you listen to a couple of people talking that have just met, they will go out of their way to acknowledge or validate someone's opinion in order to create empathy and the ability to talk to each other. Where we get into a problem is if we get into actually the politics themselves. If you start subscribing to the idea that you have to adhere to a doctrine without thinking things through. Politically, I think because of the media and because probably in the last 25 years we've become very polarized politically, that is a difficult subject. And you really get put into a camp and the door gets shut and that's it, right? Nobody can hear you anymore. Mm-hmm. But if you meet somebody out in the street and you're talking about something, you may not agree with how they feel about something, but you'll go out of your way to acknowledge some validity to something they're saying in order to keep the conversation going. We do that all the time when we meet someone new. And we will acknowledge the fact that they have a brain. We'll acknowledge the fact that they're doing something constructive. We may not agree with everything they do, but I think that's called being a human being. That's actually a good thing.
Well, and maybe I watch too much news and pay too close attention because it seems like there's a very small percentage that have a very loud voice. And,
yes, that's right? Very true.
And maybe that's intimidating to me because maybe I need to focus that it is a small number, right?
Well, when we repealed the Fairness Act, and I think it was, 1987, It's been a downward spiral, I think, from an informational point of view since then. The idea behind the Fairness Act was if you were a registered news source, you had to report both sides of every issue. When we quit doing that, we tended to subscribe to a particular point of view, and people in pursuit of profit, if you're running a newspaper, a TV station, a radio station, you have to make a profit. So what you do is you try to appeal to your base listeners. And I kid around about this a lot when I speak publicly. I say that, we have a wacko-meter out there. And I can find someone at every degree on the wacko-meter, from the far right to the far left. And I can find you a radio station. I can find you an internet site that will appeal to and validate your particular viewpoint. That's what's happened to our media. It's become very, very fragmented. You can watch one TV station, it'll be very liberal. You can watch another one, it'll be very, very conservative, and you'll never know they're talking about the same thing, which is really sad. I mean, I really go back and say, hey, maybe we made a mistake in making news all about making a profit, not about reporting all sides of each issue.
Yeah, it goes back to that whole tribal team mentality, right?
Yeah.
And I never thought about that, and I wasn't aware of that Fairness Act that got withdrawn. Well, before we dive too deep, why don't you give us a little bit of background, what you do at WFG, kind of where you got started, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. So I'll go all the way back. I grew up in a little town in North Dakota.
What town?
Bowman, North Dakota.
I love Bowman.
Oh, you know Bowman?
I used to go there once a year to hunt pheasants.
All right.
Until we had a baby. Now it's not so often. But
okay. Well, I grew up in Bowman, and I worked a little bit, went to school a little bit after high school, and ended up going in the Army in 1967, got out in 1970, spent a couple of years sort of reorienting myself, and I heard a gentleman named William Appleman Williams, who was considered one of the leading political historians of the 20th century, and I heard him speak in Southern Oregon. At that time, he was a professor at Oregon State, and he'd written a book called The Tragedy of American Diplomacy, which was probably the first widely acclaimed critical analysis of our foreign policy. And he had a couple, briefly, he had a couple of points he made. One was that we tend to project our values onto other countries and assume that they'll want the same end we want. And the other one is we don't fully acknowledge the fact that we're motivated for economic reasons. So I heard him speak. I ended up going to Oregon State and got a degree in history. And I look back on that, and I will tell you that people say, "Well, you've had a pretty successful business career. Don't you wish you would have gotten a degree in business or an MBA?" And I say, "No, I think I got perspective." And by that I mean I have been involved in I think 121 transactions in my career. I have been instrumental or the lead person on about 79 of those transactions. And one thing I do in every case is I look at the company we're thinking about acquiring, and I analyze how they got where they are. I look at the history of the company, what decisions they made that got them to where they were, because when you do that, then you have a good idea about where they can go from there. You know what their strengths are, you know how they operate, you can make an intelligent decisions about the asset you're acquiring. So a degree in history, I haven't really used it as a historian, but I've used some of the internal discipline very effectively in business and analyzing things. So I ended up looking for a job, found a job as a title examiner trainee in 1975, and it's 43 years later, and I'm still in the real estate industry. Currently, I'm executive chairman and founder of WFG National Title, which I started in 2010 after being retired technically for 6 years. And being bored, I was on the board of a major national company when I decided to start this company, and it's been a lot of fun building it. We're the 6th largest company nationally right now, and having a lot of fun with it.
Well, there's a lot to dive into there, but I want to go back to one of the first things you said, and it's about success, right, and how you got there. One of the things that Ryan and I have been talking about is what separates people like myself that are working towards one day of not working, and the people that get to that point and continue to keep working, get to the point where they're semi-retired for 6 years and they decide to start a new title company.
Well, I think, one of the problems we have, and it probably isn't well understood, but the idea of retirement at an age like 65, that's a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution and the industrialization. And working for a company for 30 to 35 years and taking retirement became the standard. That has permeated our society and how we think about things. We think about being retired, and we don't even realize that that's a byproduct of a long history of being trained to think that way. Why do you retire? You retire, the only reason someone retires is they have something they want to do. To retire and quit working because you can is absolutely foolish. You'll be bored crazy. You'll drive your significant other crazy. You got to have a purpose. People are not happy without a purpose.
Do you think that the people that have the luxury of getting there and being able to retire can find purpose in other things besides work?
Yeah, I would strongly suggest to anyone that's thinking about it to give it some thought ahead of time. I didn't the first time I retired. I was still doing quite a bit of consulting for private equity. My nephew and I have quite a bit of real estate investment and properties and do things like that. I'm involved in a nutritional company. I was involved with a mortgage company. I had interest in investments, but it wasn't the same as building something. I got to understand very quickly that I personally need to be building something. I will retire again, but I won't quit cold turkey. I will continue to contribute to building something, and I don't care what it is, really. It's the fun of making something work. I get a lot of joy out of that. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And then my wife will tell you that I wake up broke every morning, and I have my whole life. That's probably not going to change. That's not going to change, right?
Well, and that goes right into a transition of a question we like to ask almost everybody that comes on is, what about success, or why is success important to you?
I don't know that success is important to me. What I'm interested in is making something work. I mean, I guess that's, if I make it work, I'm successful, but I'm not doing it for success, and I'm not doing it for money. I'm doing it to make it work. I know a lot of people that work hard for money, and they're never happy. I know a lot of people that are trying to achieve success, and it's usually defined by how other people think of them, right? And I would suggest strongly that you're better off if you look inside and say, what makes me happy? What makes me happy is building something, making something work, putting things together. I mean, that's what makes me happy.
Well, and how many companies did you say
that I have bought or
Yeah.
actually been the lead person on or controlled the acquisition at 79?
So on company number one, kind of talk about what that was like, and did you feel like you were taking a risk? Was it exciting? I mean, what was going through, at what age, and what was going through your mind?
The first one that I actually was really intimately involved with and made the decision on was, I was 47 years old, and I was scared. Scared is a strong term, but yeah, I had a lot of anxiety, and I just...
Did you have a family at that time?
Yeah, I had a family, and I wasn't so much worried about losing money as I was about the impact on a lot of people if I did it wrong. And that's probably always been the case. I think it's, let's be real honest. If you're willing to do the work, you can find the information to give yourself a high probability of success. I've had one failure, one that was an abject failure, and then I have had one that was mediocre, and virtually all the rest of them have worked. Some have worked very, very well.
What do you attribute the so-called failures to on those situations?
Well, the bad assumptions. Just straight up bad assumptions. The one that failed, I liked the product. I liked that it was a software company. It was a company that was going to redefine the recording space for county recorders. But I didn't understand both the dynamics of county recorders making decisions or the politics of county recorders making decisions. So that was my mistake.
Gotcha.
And going back to your first one, did you feel like you were taking a risk? I mean, did the opportunity fall in your lap, or was this something you were going after?
Well, no. This was as president of a company, and yeah, the opportunity was there. Risk. You're taking a risk when you get in your car and drive to work, right? Mm-hmm. You're taking a risk that somebody's going to run you off the road. I mean, I don't dwell on risks necessarily. I tend to make sure I understand exactly what it is that we're buying, try to really understand how the company got to where it is now. I think that's really critical, and I think that often is overlooked. We have a lot of bright people working for us now in a couple companies. I've been a C officer in 3 public companies. All of them had fairly significant bright people working for them, a lot of MBAs, a lot of attorneys. Almost everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people have access to good financial information and the ability to dig into it and decide what it means. But what really is interesting to me in looking at a company is how the people think, how they got to where they are, how their thought process works, how well they are at putting something together. Can they change? One question that people don't ask a lot of times is, can the people running that company or that are instrumental in driving that company, can they change? Can they take a right when they've been going left all the time? And people don't ask that question, and that really is a critical question.
Do you think when you're in that situation, do you think that the people you're talking to realize that that's what you're looking at, or do you think they're coming in prepared, thinking you're going to look at the numbers, and that they're not necessarily looking at their character and their history and everything you just described?
I would say that 99.9% of the time they are looking at it as a set financial process and a set financial analysis. And that's what it usually is. It is financial analysis for most acquirers. And if you don't understand, I think that gives you a pretty good view to a company, but it doesn't tell you how the decision makers operate or what they're capable of doing. And it isn't a matter of has somebody made a mistake, because everybody makes mistakes, right? It's how they react to it. Making a mistake's not a problem. Not admitting it's a problem, right? It's really kind of funny, things like that. If you got somebody that you're going to count on and they've made mistakes but not admitted them, I'd be real careful.
So we've had a couple WFG guys on. We've had Noah Blanton and Justin Tucker, and both of them have kind of shared that about you and shared your leadership and what they like. And Justin shared a really good story too about a car ride after a bad marketing decision or something like that kind of sums up what you say. But growing up in North Dakota and then being in the Army, that would have been during Vietnam, correct?
Yes.
So were you drafted?
No, I volunteered.
Volunteered?
Yeah, I volunteered, yeah.
And so did your leadership derive from a lot of those experiences? I would have to imagine.
They influenced me. My father influenced me. The Army influenced me. Vietnam influenced me. Professors at Oregon State influenced me, interestingly enough, because really good professors in school, and it's really funny how that works, is we've all had good professors and bad professors, and sometimes we don't sit and think, why are they good or why they're bad? Sometimes, they're funny or they talk fast or whatever. But it's usually because they resonate with you at some level. They tweak your curiosity. They get you vested in the process. They reach out to you, and it's the same thing in business. You get people to work by giving them equity, not financial equity, but emotional ownership of what they're doing. And you can do that by training them. You can do that by giving them additional educational opportunities. You can do that especially by acknowledging the success when they have it. But if people don't have equity in what they're doing, emotional equity in what they're doing, then they don't perform at a very high level. But you learn these things from everybody. You learn it as you go through life and watch what works and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. And it's really funny to me is, and I'm sure you would identify with this, we all know people that are extraordinarily, quote, successful, and yet they're not that good looking, they're not that articulate, but but they make people feel like they're a part of it, and they acknowledge people, and they make people take ownership, right?
Well, definitely, and you definitely have people that are successful that have done it in different routes, in different ways. And one of the questions I was thinking about before we did this podcast is, I met you very briefly at the WFG Refresh event, and I didn't know who you were, and I think we were just standing next to each other and started talking about economy, and we had a good 3 or 4 minute conversation, and then some other people came up, and I said, so are you with WFG? I had no idea who you were at the time. And you just came across very genuine. And it wasn't like there was a lot of arrogance and, I'm the founder of WFG. And we've sat down with lots of different people that have different levels of success, but very few of them can carry themselves that way.
Well, I'll tell you two things. I made this joke earlier before we started that my wife is my chief humility officer, and she's very good. If I come home with a little bit too much dip in my hip and glide my stride, I get to take out the garbage, right? But I think the other thing is, life has been a blessing to me. I think since 1968, it's been a genuine gift. And I think if you see that none of it matters when life ends, you understand that none of it matters, really. And my dad used to tell me all the time, he said, the only thing you need to worry about is you like the guy you see in the mirror. Mm-hmm. If you like the guy you see in your mirror, you're doing okay. If you don't like the guy you see in your mirror, you got a problem. What everybody else says doesn't matter. So I don't really care, to be honest with you.
Well, and there's just a second, Ryan. One of my favorite political commentators was Charles Krauthammer, who recently passed away. We talked about him with
Eric Post.
Eric Post was on a couple episodes ago. And there's a lot of similarities I'm hearing about his story and yours. And he was so private that until he passed away and I got to see the documentary on him, he didn't share a lot about himself. But one of the similarities is his background was in psychiatry, and he became a speechwriter, for a presidential speechwriter. And the other similarity is, and this is something I'll remember forever, is when he knew he was going to pass, he wrote a letter, just kind of saying goodbye. And you might have to pull up the exact quote, Ryan, but he said, I will die knowing that I lived the life I intended. And so there was a lot of intention in everything he did. But at the same time, there was some accidents that happened to him, not beyond the physical accident of being paralyzed, but he kind of became a speechwriter by accident, right? Mm-hmm. So do you feel like you're intentional in the way you've lived your life?
Well, I think I'm intentional in my desire and actually my conviction that I will end each day not feeling like I lied to myself or my life, or that for somehow I'm off track is about what it's all about. And again, it's not that, and it's not. I don't want to get too far afield here. It's not spiritual. It's an absolute conviction that how you feel about yourself is what drives your behavior. And people that do things that are not necessarily desirable are usually because they are missing something or feel like they're missing something or they're left out or whatever. And I was just blessed to have a father that was just a really fine man, and I can't ever remember him telling a lie to anybody. Right? I mean, it's just he conducted himself, and everybody was equal, and everybody got the same courtesy. And so I try to emulate how he behaved. Yeah.
Well, and you can't think of a better example of being intentional with your life, like volunteering for the Army during Vietnam during the draft.
Yeah.
So I mean, right?
Yeah, trust me, I had some second thoughts.
Before or after you signed?
Both.
I mean, we're kind of going in all different directions right now, so I hope that's okay with you. But just kind of hearing a little bit more about you has me thinking a lot of different things. We talked already, we've covered politics and how divided we are, maybe some of the media reasons why. But was this country this divided during Vietnam?
It was probably more divided in the late 60s, in a very ugly manner. I mean, it got, you had the racial riots, you had the anti-war riots. I mean, you had kids at Kent State shot by the National Guard because they were protesting the war. You had Watts. You had a lot of issues in the late 60s. It came apart. It literally came apart. It was, I remember I got out of the Army in 1970. I threw everything away and never told anybody I was in the Army.
Your family?
Well, my family knew I was in the Army, but I mean, I did not go around. I mean, people now say thank you for your service. People didn't say thank you for your service. And I mean, so it was a little bit different time. You look at the history of the United States. It's kind of it's I don't want to say ironic, but it's interesting that the country tends to coalesce around outside threats. The country was having a pretty hard time with the Great Depression. You look at income inequality, you look at issues, societal issues, they really reached a peak right before the stock market crash in 1929. Then we went into the Great Depression, and World War II brought us out of the Great Depression, and we probably had a unanimity of purpose during World War II that was unmatched at any other time in the U.S. history. And that carried over during the 50s all the way into the mid-60s. So, I mean, it lasted a long time. I can remember as a kid that being a citizen and talking about being a citizen was a very important thing. And we used to define democracy as the art of compromise, right? And when's the last time you heard that definition? So, I mean, but you go along for a long time and the focus becomes individualistic. The focus becomes on yourself, not your country. I don't think there are very many people that consider their citizenship as their highest obligation right now. I don't think that's the case.
Why?
Well, because we don't have an outside threat or a common purpose. We really do not have a common purpose in this country right now. It's all about how much money can I make and me and mine, right? I mean, so it's really kind of a sad situation in the sense that we don't all share. There's a gentleman named Chris Nichols at Oregon State who's a political historian. He's on the Foreign Affairs Council. He's a very, very articulate, very well-read and smart individual who's published numerous books. Chris and I talk all the time about we thought it was a real mistake to abandon the draft. And that sounds militaristic, and it's not meant to be. But one thing that was really interesting about being in the Army was that you associated with people from all walks of life, from all race, all religion, all culture, and their blood was all the same color, right?
Yeah.
The commonality of purpose there was very enlightening. People don't have that now. I mean, people tend to look at people that are different from them, and they never get to know them. So I thought the draft was a very good, if I, for whatever it's worth, if we instituted a draft and you, for military purposes, but also for social work and everything else, so if everybody had to give 2 years of mandatory service, it doesn't have to be military.
Or even like National Guard, right?
Yeah, anything, so that you associate people with people that are different. Then you realize that everybody wants to love, everybody cares about their family, everybody has aspirations. We're all human beings, and none of us better than anybody else.
I was listening to Joe Rogan on his podcast, and he was talking about how he thinks one of the worst things that could happen to somebody is a trust fund, right? he said it's kind of like the people that he knows that have trust funds and never had to work, they're kind of like an almost done egg that's still kind of sticky on the top. And I thought about that, and then listening to you talk, I feel like our generation, Ryan and I, were both in our late 30s. We are the luckiest citizens of our country. We haven't had to face big depressions. Well, we had the Great Recession, but we haven't had to have war or drafts. We didn't have these race riots. I mean, we live in a great time right now. Not only from not having hardships like that, but we live in an awesome time to be alive from technology, right? And we're seeing technology change our society so fast. But kind of to what you said and what Joe Rogan was saying, maybe our generation is kind of like living in a trust fund, where we haven't had to pay the price of going through World War II or Vietnam and through those things. And so maybe that's a detriment to a certain point.
I don't know if it's a detriment, but I would suggest to you that you have a problem coming down the railroad track at you at about 100 miles an hour that you will be dealing with in the next 10 to 20 years, and that's income inequality. We look at the United States and you look at our society, and one of the things that has been probably the glue or the one aspect of common desire or pride was the giant or large middle class. And a lot of what we did as a country was based on the middle class. A lot of what we ascribed our strength to was the middle class. The middle class is shrinking dramatically. We are rapidly approaching a point of income inequality I think is going to present some social challenges to you and your generation. I mean, I hope it doesn't, but I'm afraid it might.
Well, that's a hot topic right now, is income inequality. I don't know that everyone that talks about income equality is looking at it from that standpoint. And I am starting to sound like a broken record, but I've been listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson. Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson? And he talks about income equality quite a bit in the hierarchy, and how it takes both political parties to make compromises to make the hierarchy work. Where do you see it going? Do you see, I mean, is the solution going to be more government and more distribution of wealth, or is it going to be more individualistic and bringing back the freedom and the individual choices that people make?
Well, this is the first really difficult question you've asked me.
All right.
This is a hard one, and I'll tell you why it's a hard one, because it's both. It's actually both. You know, you look at, are you familiar with the OECD, Organization of Economic Quality and Economic Cooperation and Development?
No.
It's an association of, I think, 34 advanced economies. The U.S. is one of them. And we share statistical information with each other. And the bulk of the countries are European. So they're, if you look at it in Japan, I mean, these are capitalistic countries, and we used to rate it towards the high end of almost every category, and I think we're first in obesity and the ability to get a doctor appointment right now, but not much else. And the countries that we, in a derogatory manner, refer to as socialist countries have a higher happiness quotient than we do. And I'm not saying that we should become socialists, but we should look at why, right? Mm-hmm. We should look at why. One of the strengths of this country for a long time was that we all believed in equal opportunity. To me, equal opportunity is equal education and equal health care. But all of a sudden, that's become, sort of a, you can't go there. That's government, it's too government provided enrichment, if you will. So I believe in equal opportunity, and then everybody do what the best they can.
But I mean, this might be a little different than what you're talking about, but growing up and having the opportunities that you did you feel like you had an equal opportunity, or do you think there were other people that didn't have the same opportunity to become Pat Stone that you did?
I thought I had all the opportunity I ever needed. I never felt I was deprived of opportunity. I went to college on the GI Bill. I think it was, and forgive me if I don't get this exactly right, but I think I got $100 a month on the GI Bill. Yeah. But that covered, and then I worked part-time, so for spending money, but that covered my tuition, and I was able to squeak by on rent with another ex-GI buddy. But I never felt deprived of opportunity. I worry a little bit now that our educational system has become very significant change in the quality of our, significant range of quality, I should put it that way, in our education system from elementary all the way through college. I worry about, I actually, even though it's somewhat cumbersome and not very well executed, I liked Obamacare because it provided equal health. It could have been done better, obviously. So I'm really torn back and forth on that one. I worry a lot about what's happened in our country. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the numbers before that, the average Fortune 500 company CEO made 20 times what their average employee made in 1980. Now they make 280 times as much. So there's a lot of things going on that don't make sense.
Can you just grab that mic and slide it this way just a few inches? Perfect.
Okay.
So when we talk about income equality, do you think that that's the biggest problem with the income equality is the amount of money at the top, or do you think it's the income equality on the smaller scale?
Well, if you look at the charts that show total wealth and concentration in the top 1% and 10%, it's really, I can't give you the precise number off the top of my head, but it is. It used to be that the bottom 50% made 20% of the income, and the top 1% made 10% of the income. That was in 1980. Now it's just reversed. The top 1% makes more than the bottom 50%. So you tell me. I mean, that's not sustainable. It's not.
Yeah.
And that's what scares me. I mean, I don't know that I know the answer, and I'm not trying to articulate like I have some vision. I can just tell you that I see a train coming down the track.
Well, I mean, you can't watch the news for more than 5 minutes before hearing income inequality and wealth distribution and what's the new term for everyone gets income? Not welfare, but what's the new thing? The Bernie Sanders.
Oh. Yeah, and actually that's been pioneered in a couple countries. I can't get my head around that one. I can't quite get there on that one.
And they're actually doing a test run of it in Chicago,
Yeah.
where 1,000 people are going to get $500 a week or a month.
Yeah, and there's a couple. There's a country in Northern European doing that too, and I don't remember which one, but I don't know that that's the answer either. I mean, I don't know. I think it would be really good for us to acknowledge the problem, though. It would be nice to have everybody acknowledge the problem, then try to work together to fix it.
Well, we talked about being polarizing, saying income equality, you're going to polarize. I mean, people are going to immediately step into their team.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
What about, so I'm a first generation millennial. I think if you look at I think it's 1981 through 90 something.
I missed the cut. I'm good to go.
But what about the generation coming up after us? Obviously, they're going to have, if that's going to be the biggest issue we're going to face in 10 years, they're going to be part of it. But one topic we cover on this show quite a bit is the misconception of millennials. And right now, they're entitled, lazy. But I think that again, there's definitely some that are, but I think a lot of people are miscategorizing millennials. Kind of what's your opinion on millennials, kind of with what you're experiencing? And Justin Tucker did a great presentation on marketing to millennials.
Yeah, I have 3 daughters that are millennials, and I hate categorizing any group. I think it's this is a byproduct of that press we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very convenient to categorize things because then you can appeal to a certain viewpoint. I don't think all millennials are alike, and are there traits? Perhaps. Are they uniform? No. Do I want to throw the whole group out because I don't think that they appreciate certain things? I think that's garbage. I think that's just utter garbage. And I would suggest to you that every single generation looks too the hell in a handbasket. That's been going on forever.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
So I don't buy into any of that. My daughters are much more adept at social media than I am, obviously, but they're good mothers and they've got good values. I have no issue with them and their generation.
I do. There's definitely some, right? And we're in an industry where it's 100% commission. The sky's the limit, and that's I think a reason people survive, and the reason people fail in our industry is that freedom and not having the discipline to take advantage of that freedom. And so I think a lot of millennials aren't prepared for that. Let's shift gears. Unless you had some, I totally railroaded you earlier.
No,
right?
you're fine. You're fine.
Can we talk about economics a little bit?
Sure.
So what do you think's going on? You like where we're at, or is the economy as strong as everyone says it is?
Well, the economy is as strong as everyone says it is right now. It has been. We poured gas on a fire.
What do you?
We did. The economy was doing fine. I mean, the job growth rate was from about 2011 on to 2017, the job growth rate was what it is currently. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. The tax cut was absolutely unnecessary. It was poorly conceived, and it is going to create a tremendous problem. We are going to have huge deficits. We put gas on a bonfire, and now we can all roast our marshmallows from a block away. But we will pay for it.
How come that's not being talked about on either channel, whether it's Fox
let me
News or
ask you a
CNN?
question.
You don't talk about. They never bring up the deficit. That's all we heard about for 8 years.
Let me ask you a question. All right. Do the people that own both channels make money? Are they capitalists? Absolutely. If you're a capitalist, if you own stock in America, if you have investment capital at work, it doesn't get any better. But you know what? It is ungodly short-sighted.
Well, I remember for a long time seeing the ticker with the debt.
Yeah.
Since the new administration, I don't think I've seen that ticker once on the news.
Well, I think it's real unfortunate. And what's happening right now is we're benefiting greatly. We're seeing tremendous growth in corporate earnings this earnings season. Stock market has gone up about 1,000 points here in the last couple of weeks, and it's looking very healthy. Here's going to be an interesting point of view. If we have this conversation a year from now, you will not see the year-over-year earnings growth. And all of a sudden, you're going to start talking about this. You're going to talk about the debt. Let me give you some numbers just for fun. There's 50% more corporate debt in this country than there was in 2009, right before the bubble burst, right? We were leveraged to the hilt. We've got 50% more corporate debt. Total credit market debt in this country is $63 trillion. Just for fun, if interest rates go up 3%, that's $1.8 trillion in interest, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's 10% of our economy. So now I don't expect interest rates to go up 3%, but interest rates could go up. You know why interest rates have stayed so low? We've stayed so low because we run a trade deficit offset by an investment surplus. If you look at a chart of the trade deficit, I can show you a chart that's correspondingly on the other side of income coming into this country and being invested in U.S. bonds and other things. So what's happened is we've kept rates down because we've had so many foreign dollars buying treasuries and U.S. bonds.
But we're not the only.
So what happens when that stops?
But we're not. Well, but we're not the only country. Japan's at a 0% rate and has been for many years.
I understand. Yeah, but that's a little bit different situation. But yes, we have had low rates because we've had so many people willing to buy our bonds. If we continue to run a deficit for we're going to run about an $800 billion deficit this year, maybe $850 billion. We're going to go over $1 trillion next year. How many years in a row can we run $1 trillion deficit and our rates will stay low? In order to sell our T-bills, we're going to have to raise the rates if we keep doing this for very long. If we go at the current rate through 2026, we're going to have the same metrics as Italy. Do you think people are going to give us low rates? We have the same debt to debt to the economy as Italy does.
When this podcast is over, should I go buy gold? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I don't. I never liked gold. I didn't even like gold in the downturn. But I would be really smart in my long-term thinking. I think things are good right now. You'd be silly not to take advantage of things being good right now. But keep in mind that we are in a very artificial, highly induced market right now. And it scares me. I mean, we increase spending, increase government spending, and increase debt simultaneously in the good time. Any economist worth a cent will tell you that's a bad idea.
So what about these trade wars that are being started and renegotiating our trade policies? Does that have any impact? I mean,
yes, it's going to have a really negative impact. It's going to have a negative impact. Did you see the headlines today where the Trump administration is going to make, how much was it they're going to feed the farmers? $12 billion to make up for the fact they can't sell their soybeans anymore to China?
The government's going to subsidize
Yeah,
them?
the government's going to subsidize the farmers that are getting hurt because they can't export their, I mean, that's going to work real well.
But if he wins the trade battle with China.
How do you win the trade battle? Study history. Nobody's ever won a trade battle. I mean, you don't win a trade. I'm sorry.
Well, then how are we? No, this is good. This is good. This is
okay, you got me going.
No, this is really good. But weren't we losing? I mean, the way it was described.
The only thing that was wrong out there was the intellectual property issues, because China was requiring companies to do joint ventures in order to do business in China. And part of the joint ventures were that they've exposed their intellectual property to their partner. So basically, China was stealing intellectual property. Mm-hmm. The trade imbalance, it's not a zero-sum game. It never has been, right? I mean, rich countries are going to buy more than poor countries. The poor country turns around and buys T-bills. China buys a lot of T-bills, right? So, I mean, there's ups and downs. I mean, give you NAFTA. Okay, so here's a number for NAFTA for you. Net gain of 400,000 jobs because of NAFTA. That's a real bad deal, isn't it? Yeah. You know what the average, I'm sorry. Do you know what the average manufacturer employee in the U.S. makes annual comp? 83,000. You know why that is because what we manufacture here is highly skilled. Low-skilled items have gone abroad to be manufactured by low-cost labor. What we should have done to fix the problem is increase our education and retrain people, not do a stupid trade war.
But hasn't a lot of manufacturing
Sorry,
come
this
back?
is not even a political comment. I cannot find an example in history in which doing tariffs has worked out. I can't find any place that it's ever worked.
Well, let's back up just a little bit.
Sorry.
No, this is good. And it's taking.
You got my blood going now.
It's taking every.
I'm awake now.
It's taking every brain cell in my brain right now to even keep up with the conversation. Yeah, this is one. This is a really easy place to not sound educated for me. But let's back up just a little bit because hasn't a lot of the manufacturing come back to the U.S.?
No.
But what about all the
what manufacturing has come back to the U.S.?
All the auto.
What that's been here for a while,
but a lot of it left, and a lot of them are shutting their factories down and bringing it back, aren't they?
No. Listen, 40% of everything made in the world is made by U.S. corporations. Half of it's made overseas. The trade war is actually going to hurt our own companies along with foreign government, but it's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt us more than it hurts anybody else. I mean, this is just my personal opinion, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I think this was an appeal to the president's base, is what I think this was. From an economic point of view, I don't think it'll do any good. His walking out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I think, was a real mistake because we had a chance with the TPP to put tremendous pressure on China. We would have had a trade agreement with all the Asian nations. We could have put pressure on China to amend or quit screwing with the intellectual property issue. We could have got them to change that if we'd have joined TPP and used that as pressure on them. But we withdrew from TPP. We'll see where this goes. There may be some bones thrown to try to put, to appease everybody. But trade wars don't typically work. They never have, and I don't think they will.
At what point is it classified as a trade war? Because right now we're just in negotiations, right?
To my knowledge, there's very little negotiating going on. But you start escalating it to the $500 billion range that he's talking about, then it's a trade war.
All right, let's
just for fun.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take you way back in history here. So, the richest nation in the world, or close to the richest nation in the world, certainly the richest nation in the Western civilization was Spain in 1500, right?
Okay.
And Spain, because they basically had conquered the Mid-America and South America, they had a phenomenal amount of gold. I mean, they started practicing what was called mercantilism. And basically mercantilism was that they wouldn't buy anything from anybody else. And do you recall, you ask people about Spain now, Spain's kind of like a third world country.
Mm-hmm. Don't put any money in the banks.
I mean, it's just mercantilism was the downfall of the richest country in Europe, and it just doesn't work. I mean, it's just, anyway.
Well, I remember when they were going through their major financial crisis that people would go to the ATMs and no money would come out.
No money would come out. Well, we've got to wait. Still have a fairly strong financial, a country that's strong financially, but we do not want to run $1 trillion+ deficit every year for the next 5-6 years. We don't want to do that. It's not a good idea.
All right, so let me ask a question my wife asked me, and I had a hard time answering it. This is a very basic question. We have recessions and we have great economies, and there's a cycle that goes back and forth. Why does there have to be a cycle? Why can't it just be a calm economy? She asked me that question. I said, that's a great question.
Well, typically recessions are caused by overheating, by financial dysfunction, by fiscal shocks. I mean, there's usually a reason. Most recessions fall into one of those areas or a couple more. And, the fiscal shocks, you can have something like, tremendous devaluation of a currency because of debt or something. Financial dysfunction is what happened to us for the Great Recession, right? That was financial dysfunction on Wall Street, right? They blamed it on real estate, but really it was the subprime loans and the securitization of subprime loans. Overheating is when you overinvest, and you get a lot of debt at the corporate level, and things slow down, and they can't service the debt as the rates go up, which is what I'm saying could happen this time because you have 50% more corporate debt. Rates start going up. It's going to get very expensive to carry that debt. So there's a lot of reasons recession happen, but they basically happen because you don't stay, everybody doesn't earn the same amount or spend the same amount on a continuing basis, right? Some people do well, companies do well, countries do well. But one other comment there,
yes,
real
please.
quick. You don't have any progress if you don't have some uneven growth. So
Gotcha.
It's pretty natural.
Do you see in the next few years consumer debt being a problem?
And, the consumer debt, mortgage debt is just now getting back to where it was in 2008. I think
As far as levels of
total level debt. Non-mortgage debt is coming up on 30% of a consumer debt. So, most people point at student loans, and student loans are a problem. But really, if you break down student loans, the bulk of student loans are fairly small. You have some for privately owned higher education student debt that's a little egregious, but the bulk of student debt is still okay. Auto loans are a little bit of a problem. We did a lot of subprime auto loans. I mean, the auto loan industry wasn't under the CFPB until I think July of 2015. So you were having people make 100% auto loans, and there's a foreclosure rate, a delinquency rate on non-financial auto loans is probably close to 10% right now. It's pretty high. So to answer your question directly, consumer debt is not a crisis right now, and I don't think it will be a crisis. I look a little bit more towards corporate debt and government debt as being a problem.
Don't let me forget to bring up the CFPB. Okay?
The CFPB, okay.
Don't go there yet. But I want to talk about the
Okay.
CFPB. But before we do, the reason I asked about the consumer debt is because Ryan and I are in the mortgage industry, and what I fear happening is all these people that gone in at 3.5%, 3.75%, 4%. It's a rate of a lifetime, right?
It is.
And I see these homeowners with this incredible rate of a lifetime starting to acquire consumer debt, large amounts of it. And what I'm nervous is when a client comes back to me and says, all right, I've got $40,000 in consumer debt, rates have gone up, I'm a little nervous about my payments. I have a lot of equity now because values have gone up. So I want to go out and get a home equity line and pay off and consolidate all this debt.
Yes.
If interest rates do rise and values start to soften a little bit, we could run into LTV issues. And then they're not going to be able to get the lines of credit they need to consolidate that debt. And now they're in trouble. So what do we have to do? Refinance them into a government FHA loan or a high loan to value, and their 3.5% rate is gone. And that is a life-changing economic decision. Am I right in thinking that that's a possibility that could happen?
I don't think you're wrong in thinking it's a possibility. Am I worried about it? No. I don't think you will see rates go up fast enough in the near future to offset the appreciation, which has been pretty phenomenal. I do worry about it maybe if we continue to run the deficit and we pop rates significantly. That's the problem, again, with running $1 trillion deficit. We do that for 3, 4, 5 years, then you'll see rates go up. And if you see rates go up 3%, it becomes problematic, absolutely.
Well, and if it becomes problematic to the level or even close to the level it did during the crash, then are we looking at having to bring rates back down and start this whole circus over again where we're doing stimulus packages and bailouts?
We didn't bring the rates down. I mean, yeah, we look at the Fed and we think the Fed controls rates. The Fed controls Fed rates, but if you look at the Fed rate versus a mortgage rate, correlation is very, very weak. I mean, it really is very weak. You really have a lot of money in the world, and basically because we had free trade, moving around and keeping rates. If we cut free trade, I'd worry more about that impacting your rates than anything else.
Interesting.
Yeah, because we won't have the money coming in to buy our bonds. We benefit tremendously. Yes, we spend more money than any other country because we buy more things, but we get the benefit right now of all that money coming back and buying our bonds and keeping the rates low. That's what worries me.
So that's the piece people, are you saying that's the piece people are like me who just watch the news are missing?
They're totally missing it.
Is that, yes, there's a trade deficit, but what we're not seeing is that they're buying our treasury bonds and those type of things, not necessarily our goods.
We achieved globalization, and globalization was a free flow of capital around the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
That kept rates down. That actually engendered growth. We were actually, ironically, on the point of people of an emerging global middle class that would buy our more high-skilled products, but we were shooting ourselves in the foot on that one. So, I mean, it's really, globalization was a long and is a long process, and we were actually to the point where I think we would have started getting benefit from it in this country with people buying more of the things that we make and produce here. So.
CFPB.
CFPB.
So
can I go back a little bit?
Please do, yeah.
So one of the things that you're concerned about that, and I think it's a legitimate concern. It's going to be a function of how fast rates go up. I continue to hope. I can't tell you with certitude, but I continue to hope that they won't go up that fast. That we will see some realignment, maybe some adjustments to the tax cuts that will get refocused on paying attention to our deficit a little bit. And that we won't have a trade war, or we won't keep it going very long. So if we do those things, then I don't think rates will go up. But what really concerns me is you buy a home, let's say you're in your late 30s and you buy a home with a 3.75% interest rate. Historically, by the time you're 50, you usually sold that home and moved to another home. Mm-hmm. Why would you now with a 3.75% interest rate? I think what we've done is we've locked ourselves into a point where we're going to see a slowdown in turnover of existing homes. And if you're in this industry and you look out 10, 15 years, you're going to have less people selling their home, either moving to a wealthier neighborhood or even downsizing as they get close to retirement. If I have a 3.75% interest rate, am I going to go out and sell my home and buy something at 6 or 7%? I'll have to think about it.
Depends.
Yeah, it depends. I'll have to think about it. So I think that I worry about that. I worry about it changing a little bit of the velocity of home sales. So one man's opinion.
And that wouldn't be a bad thing.
Well, we're running 5.5 million right now. You're in the mortgage business. I'm in the title insurance business. If it goes down to 4.5, we both feel it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would be a bad thing, especially. Yeah, so nice guy, right? You want to talk about CFPB?
No, but I mean, with my dialogue, I'm always conscious of my dialogue with the people I do business with and making sure I'm passing along good information. It just seems like now's the time to be very cautious about going into more consumer debt. And I would hate to see some of these people coming back to me and being forced to refinance the rate of the lifetime, and I really don't want to see that happen.
Well, I would agree with you, and I would take us back to our conversation a few minutes ago about income inequality. A lot of people have not seen any significant change in their income. They're working hard, but they're not. The increases in income.
Who are these people? Are these? Is it everybody, or is it
minorities,
or is it women? That's
the average person in America has seen a very, very low increase in their income over the last 10 years. So we'll see. I mean, if inflation goes up, it's going to get real painful. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I know I worry about things that probably, it can't help myself, but I worry about things that could have, if it could have, would have, should have, right? But if you see any sort of inflation, you see any sort of increase in interest rates, then the people that haven't had income are going to have a problem.
So, I mean, but we're talking about seeing the GDP at 4%. Isn't that good?
Well, that's great. How long do you think it's going to stay there?
I don't know. Hopefully a long time.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be up close to 4% in the second quarter. I think for the year, it'll probably be about 2.8. I'll bet you next year it'll be lower.
Don't know.
Was that the air conditioner?
Sounded like it.
Well, at least it worked for the podcast. At least it's not producing it. All right, so CFPB, for those who aren't familiar, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, product of the crash, right? had a lot of power up until a few months ago. We are, in my industry, we're seeing them drop cases, like they just dropped the case of Zillow they were going after. And we're seeing them have a lot less power over these fines, and we're seeing the Dodd-Frank Act going to be rewritten. What's your opinion on all that? Good, bad, indifferent?
Well, I think I think the enactment of CPFB, I think Dodd-Frank, I think a lot of these things were necessary and had a positive impact on restoring faith in the financial system. I do not think that you will see a tremendous walk back on the functionality. You're going to change from being an aggressive. You're going to see a change from administering through fines through administering through review or whatever. I mean, you're going to get a little bit less. I guess you will get a little bit less aggressive in the manner in which regulations are administered. But I was, and I was kind of really curious about this, and I went to the MBA Chairman's Conference in Aspen, Colorado, a couple of months ago. And I asked a lot of the people there, I said, so how do you feel about the changes in CFPB and the way it's being administered and all that? And to a man, nobody is changing their regulatory and compliance staffing. They're not. So I think the net effect is good and will stay in place, I hope. I mean, I think, it got really silly. I mean, it was stupid in 2008, 2009. I mentioned earlier that I had been...
What was stupid, the CFPB or
the
lending?
American Finance and Lending Standards. I was mentioned earlier I was an investor in a mortgage company. We sold it in April of 2007.
Oh.
Thank you. Because I could say, even then I was terrified about what was going on. We were selling loans to Wall Street. And we, in 2005, the mortgage company I was an investor in.
Can I ask the name of it?
Metro City Mortgage.
Okay.
We originated $10 billion in 2005. We sold $9 billion to Wall Street. We had a subprime group, and we were selling to Wall Street. On average, we were getting 104. I mean, we were making a ton of money selling to Wall, and they would buy anything.
Can you explain for people to understand
what
you mean by 104?
Well, you're getting 4% on basically 4% on your money, and that's for a turnaround of about 60 days. So that's run that out. That's 24% annualized.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. So it was wonderful. We were printing money, but I remember sitting in a board meeting in November of 2005, and I was chairman, and I'm sitting in the board meeting, and I'm looking at I like, you probably can tell I like numbers, and I'm looking at numbers, I'm looking at statistics, and I noticed that our subprime group had an average FICO of 565. And I said, what are you guys doing? You're making loans 565, you're making these 80-20 loans. That's where we basically two loans to the same borrower, one for 80%, one for 20%, sell the two loans separately. I said, you're making basically a 100% loan to this person that has a 565 FICO. What are you doing? Well, you don't understand, Pat. That's the market. So we shut down the subprime group about 6 months later because I couldn't do that. I mean, that was like, why don't you play Russian roulette, right?
Yeah. Well, and those people weren't getting 30-year fixed.
No, I mean, it just was insane. And it's just the garbage that, I mean, it was, so we decided to sell the company, and we got out in the nick of time.
Why did the feds, when Ben Bernanke was the chairman, why did they raise rates so fast, so consecutive during that crash? Because they raised
rates before this. Now let me tell you something. Go back and look at what the Fed rate did. The Feds raised the rate almost 5%, and mortgage rates came down during that period of time.
Let's back up just a little bit so people can follow us here that aren't in the industry. So, and you, I might be wrong on this, but rates started climbing during, like in 05, 06, right? When they started to go
They
up.
started raising rates, yes, Fed rates.
But didn't the feds see what was going on in the mortgage industry and see
Yes.
that everyone had adjustable rates, subprime
Yes.
loans? So why would they go ahead and raise it like 18 meetings in a row?
They were raising Fed rates to try to slow down the economy. I mean, everybody says, well, Fed raises rates, slow down. Well, it didn't work. It had no impact at all. I mean, people go back and yell at Bernanke or actually, well, it wasn't Bernanke. Was it Bernanke then? Or was it
Well, what Greenspan and then
Greenspan.
Bernanke.
Yeah, when was the change from Greenspan?
It was during the Bush. It was during the Bush administration. It must
it?
have been 04, 05, right in there.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, they did raise Fed rates. I mean, they raised Fed rates to try to slow the economy down. And it didn't work.
And one of the things that consumers didn't understand on these ARMs is usually the first adjustment had no cap.
Yeah, I mean,
And so I always looked at the Fed at the time going, well, what do you think was going to happen when he raised rates 18 meetings in a row to these people that have 2-year adjustable rates and are continuing to take out consumer debt?
well, I think the idea was to keep inflation from running amok, basically. Slow things down, slow the economy down.
So Greenspan was 87 to 2000.
Okay, so was Bernanke from 2000, yeah.
His beard got really white during that time.
Yeah. So, I mean,
So they were doing it to try to slow down
the economy down, yeah, and keep it from overheating, which
Yeah.
causes a recession, which is basically what it did. It was financial dysfunction, but it was also overheating. So and people look at the Fed. I mean, one of the things that's happened during this during the last 8 years is we've come to ascribe a lot of power and effectiveness to the Fed. I would say that we have overdone that. I mean, the president the other day made a comment about, wish the Fed wasn't raising rates. And, well, I think we're giving the Fed too much credit for it. I mean, it can impact things, but it doesn't control things. So,
Do you see any changes with with Fannie and Freddie coming up as far as the power they have?
they don't have any power. Fannie and Freddie, what are you talking about? Fannie and Freddie don't exist. It's all the U.S. Treasury. This is from you and I are in this business, and this biggest issue we have right now is there is no capitalization in Fannie and Freddie. What happens when they start losing money? Do you think the Treasury is going to continue to finance them? Mm-hmm. They're not. What's going to happen to the mortgage business in the tank? What's going to happen to the title business in the tank? I mean, when I talk publicly around the country, I tell them my biggest fear right now from the business point of view is that we don't do something to recapitalize Fannie and Freddie before the next downturn. Because if you start having a downturn, you think the Treasury, you think the people in Congress are going to say, oh, no problem, go ahead and fund them. I don't think so. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to get really ugly.
So do you think it's better to start defunding them now?
Not defunding them, refunding them.
Refunding them.
Recapitalize them. And there's been some good programs put forth. The MBA under Dave Stevens put together a really good idea about how to recapitalize Fannie and Freddie. I mean, it can be done. Right now, the Treasury is taking all their earnings into the Treasury. Let them keep their earnings, and they'd let them keep a little bit late last year. But if they kept all their earnings, they could recapitalize reasonably fast. But, I mean, they got to do something, because if there's a downturn, I doubt seriously that Congress will vote to have the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Treasury fund Fannie and Freddie so we can have a mortgage market. And there is no mortgage market without it.
Because that's really just another bailout.
What is another bailout? If they did that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it would be a bailout, but I don't see it happening. I mean, that would be nice. I mean, I worry about that. I sincerely worry about that.
So what's the argument for not doing it?
Because the Treasury's getting all the money. This goes, I like you, but you're you got to understand that this isn't logic. I mean, the Treasury is getting, what about $3 billion a quarter from each or something like that? I mean, this is, free money, right?
Yeah.
Hey, let the good times roll. I mean, this is so short-sighted, it's scary.
What's scary is that I feel like I'm pretty educated on it, and I feel really dumb sitting here talking to you. And I feel like I'm a lot more educated than most people. So, I mean, and people are getting their economic knowledge from two different sources of news, right?
Yep.
So do you think that that's an issue too with people's level of understanding?
I do not think that you can get your information just from news. We don't have news, we have entertainment. I made the comment earlier, and I don't think people are there's necessarily overt ill intent. But candidly, if you're running a media outlet, whether it's right or left, you're running it to appeal to your people that pay. Mm-hmm. Right, and they may pay by buying your advertiser's product or whatever. They may pay through subscription, depending on how you finance your media outlet. But you have to appeal to them. So you're not giving them news. You're giving them information that reaffirms their particular point of view. So you can't get a complete understanding by watching the news unless that's all you do, and you go back and forth between 50 channels. Right?
Well, and sometimes I find that I get a lot of knowledge from having somebody with two different people with two different views on an economic topic.
That'll help.
And so I learn a lot that way too.
Yeah, I really recommend, if for what it's worth, I read the New York Times and Wall Street Journal every morning. I read them both, and I just laugh because one of the things I like to do is find articles about the same thing and see if I can recognize them, right? Because sometimes you don't. I read The Economist, which is a weekly magazine.
Yep.
I highly recommend The Economist. It's a British magazine. It's very well done. I'll read the Financial Times. I subscribe to Bloomberg, read that religiously. But I try to read a lot of different things. And actually, I'll tell you, from a pure business point of view, I like the Wall Street Journal. I don't like the editorial page, but I like the Wall Street Journal for business.
Why don't you like the editorial page?
Well, it's gotten under Rupert, it's gotten very conservative to the point where some of it I agree with, and a lot of it I think is too far to the right.
It was Rupert Murdoch, right?
Yeah.
When did he acquire the Wall Street Journal?
I can look that up too.
Yeah, look that up. I don't know.
Because it was always kind of known as a very unbiased.
It was very
publication.
common sense for a lot of years,
Yeah.
but it's gotten very politically oriented, which I think is unfortunate.
All right, my brain's starting to hurt. Let's switch gears after we find this out. Talk about a smart guy.
Let's see here.
Wall Street Journal, 2007.
That sounds right.
Yeah, he bought it in 2007.
And he still owns Fox, right?
Oh, I don't know.
It says he's a board member
Board
of
member.
21st Century.
Yeah, Wall Street Journal, 2007.
Yeah.
Yep.
What are some of your favorite, or do you have any favorite books right now, new books on the economy?
Oh, gosh.
Because there are a lot of new political books coming out right
Yeah,
now.
there's a ton.
A lot about Russia and what's going on. So
Yeah, I just read. Oh gosh, I'm having a senior moment. I just read a book about the Israeli psychologists that poked holes in a lot of the economic assumptions about human behavior. The Turning Project, or what was it? I forget the name of it, but it was really good.
sounds familiar.
Yeah, I enjoyed reading that.
Do you follow Jordan Peterson at all?
No.
Well, I would. If you ever, I can email you a couple podcasts he did and a couple lectures that he gave. I'd love to get your opinion on him.
Okay.
But let's switch gears a little bit.
I'll email you the name of the book. I
That's
can't
fine.
remember it.
Yeah, emails. We'll bring it up on the next podcast because I really think that it's a good time to get schooled up if you're not already on basic economics and what is going on now and how it could impact us for the next 10 years. Because I think it's going to be, this last 10 years it was all rebuilding and there was some comfort in that.
Yeah.
And I'm a little nervous.
I would be too. Just for fun. So my education really started my first father-in-law, my first wife's dad, and actually stayed close to him all the way till he died, and she stayed close to my parents. Anyway, in 1976, he turned me on to a book called Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And it was written, I think, in 1861. And I don't remember the guy's name. Scottish journalist wrote it. But the reason he had me read it, it was an analysis of 7 different bubbles. The tulip bubble. You ever hear of the tulip bubble?
No.
Oh, so the tulips were real. At one point in England, owning tulips was considered just to be the ultimate
Luxury.
and I think tulip bubbles the highest one went for $12,000 or something in current money.
Is it that one there?
Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. Extraordinary Popular Delusions and
There we are.
the Madness of Crowds. So it was written in, what does it say, 18?
Go to the Wikipedia.
1841 maybe? 1841?
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, it talks about the French paper money bubble. It talks about the South Sea bubble. And so
Charles Mackay.
Charles Mackay, that's it. Anyway, difficult book to read because it was written so long ago and the phraseology and all that. But here's what happens. Here's what happens when you read that book. You realize that mankind and the human race will continue to do this from one delusion to the next. People, one of the fallacies of a free market is that a free market will become is the ultimate rational vehicle. That if you have a totally free market unencumbered by regulations, that people will get to the perfect answer. That's not how it works. It absolutely goes off the deep end. And a guy that's a friend of Ed Ray, Ed's the president of Oregon State, a guy he went to school with at Stanford, got his doctorate degree in economics with, wrote a book called Global Shocks that came out about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. And this guy points out that the bubbles, the cycle of bubbles is accelerating with less and less regulation. And that's really the story behind extraordinary popular delusions. Human beings will automatically chase something over the edge every time. They're like lemmings, right?
Mm-hmm. Buffalo.
Yeah, whatever. But it's just when you read that and you step back and you go, wow. So we don't automatically revert. And that's also this Israeli psychologist. We actually, if you take human beings and you look at opportunity versus risk, we approach them differently. We don't make the logic works differently. So it's really interesting to read about that. So, you look at, we will never do that again. I say, oh yeah, we do it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So,
we have a very short-term memory.
We have no memory.
Well, and it's crazy because I see people making the same mistakes that were made before the Great Recession with real estate investments.
Yep.
And I remember Vancouver isn't known for their for the number of Lamborghinis that are owned, right? But I remember right before the crash, seeing a lot of Lamborghinis, right? People making it big in real estate, and it was what's the smaller Lamborghini, not the Murcielago, but the other one. There you would see one or two a day, and then the crash happened, and I see people starting to kind of get back into that. I see some people I know buying big expensive houses, and I'm really nervous.
Yeah, I am too. I don't think we are. I don't think we have to go there again. Globalization. One of the things that probably is not appreciated by globalization is we expanded our economic footprint tremendously. So we have access to low-cost labor. We have unlimited markets. We have access to raw material. So what we did, instead of being an economy that is enclosed, that can overheat, go up and down, and all that, we became a global economy where if you have needs or excesses, it dispels. It kind of like it's like the heat diffuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So globalization actually, I think, was a tremendous accomplishment, and I hate to see us walk away from it. Hopefully, we won't. Sorry, I didn't mean to get off on that side.
No, and just kind of one thought I've been thinking for the last few years is I just want to be on the right side of the pendulum, because I felt like I was on the wrong side of the pendulum during the Great Recession.
In what way?
It would have been great to have a time machine, knowing what we know now, and have the assets to take advantage of the recession. Go out and buy properties at dirt cheap, or get involved with different companies. Get involved with startups. I think one of the best things that came out of the recession was people that lost their businesses, lost everything, had to start over. And so you have a lot of companies like Uber and some of these other companies that came out of that. A lot of mortgage companies, a lot of title companies. People thought they were crazy when they were opening their doors.
I got told that a lot in
Right?
January 2010.
Yeah. And so it's like, what are you doing? Isn't now the worst time? So I want to be on the right side of the pendulum as I get older. But I think that's a big thing that people don't realize is out of that recession, a lot of people refound themselves, rebranded themselves, built a lot of technology, and probably accelerated that a little bit.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about like your work-life balance and Are you a guy that you said you have some interest in a nutrition company? Do you work out? What's your days like?
I have a gym, and I lifted weights this morning, and I try to work out 4 days a week in my gym. I like to play golf. I collect art. Been very involved. I was chairman of the Art Museum in Santa Barbara. I was chairman of the Oregon State University Foundation. Been very involved with the Los Angeles Mission. I've given a lot of money to the Clark County Food Bank. I actually donate about 10% of my income to charity or philanthropic causes. But I think art and golf are my two passions. I've been very blessed. I met my wife. She was running a customer service department in a title company I bought in 1989. So,
was that
go
Fidelity?
figure.
Was that Fidelity?
Well, it was. I was working for Fidelity, and we bought Western Title here
Gotcha.
in Portland. And she's been a godsend, because when I was running Fidelity, living in Santa Barbara, we were very blessed. I mean, we lived very well, and I traveled 102 nights a year on average for 9 straight years. Had my own jet. That was nice, right? A corporate jet, but it was really very convenient. But my wife made sure that every weekend we had something with the kids that was memorable. Like we would have a picnic at the beach, or we go to the museum, or we do something. So my kids never talk about me being gone, because they have all these memories, right? So she was very, very careful to make sure that we had something we did as a family every week that was memorable.
That's neat.
And,
was it easy to be present during that time with everything you had going on when you're in those moments? Is it easy to be present?
Yeah, I learned that one the hard way. It took me about a year to figure it out, and I was exhausted. I was depressed. I was going crazy. I took over Fidelity. It was about 80% the size of WFG right now. And so took it over, it was doing $400 million in revenue, and I left 9 years later, it was doing $4.5 billion.
Wow.
And so it was pretty crazy, but about a year and a half, and I was exhausted, and I came home one night, and we just sat and talked, and I decided when I wasn't at work, I wasn't at work, and that's the way I am. If I'm not at work, I'm not at work. So I'm doing whatever I'm doing. And once you get, if you're not at work, why take it with you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you solve a lot of problems at 10 at night? I don't think so.
Lose a lot of sleep.
You lose a lot of sleep.
Yeah.
You got any tips for insomnia? I've been having really bad. I'm serious. I've been having such bad insomnia, and so I try to not think about work, and then I end up thinking about fly fishing, and then my brain's running about fly fishing. So I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
Half a unisom.
I typically go to bed about 10:30, and I read for a half hour and go to sleep at 11.
And so
And I get up at 5.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So there's this kind of a new trend in not sleeping very much.
Well, I've been like that since I was in the Army. 6 hours is a lot, and I'm well rested at 6 hours, and I get up at 5 and I work out. And
Trump sleeps 4 hours. What do you think about that?
I don't know what Trump does. I don't know what he says he does versus what he actually does. I don't have any idea.
I'm just trying to get your blood going again.
No, I sincerely hope that Donald Trump has a successful presidency. I really do.
Yeah, do you think that that's not to keep going back to politics, but do you think that that's a problem that because even when Obama was elected, I wanted him to succeed.
Yeah,
right. Because
absolutely.
he's our president.
He's our president. Absolutely.
And that's one thing that's really sad to see is you have entertainers saying that they hope there's a recession, that they want him to fail. Mm-hmm. But if he fails, then we all fail, right?
Yeah, that's yes, absolutely. And you look at your life and you think about things and you watch things change in your life. And one thing that hasn't changed in my whole life that I don't think has changed, and that is the willingness for people to listen to people talk about something they know nothing of. Mm-hmm. And so since I've been a little kid, entertainers have made comments about things they know nothing, and yet we still listen to them. So I try real hard not to listen to entertainers.
Well, and I think social media and whatnot in today's technology age has really exacerbated that.
It sure has. It has. It's gotten crazy. I mean, and again, you have the media outlets that are subscribing to or trying to appeal to a certain viewpoint, and they're going to publish it, right? And like it's really meaningful, and it's not. So
well, and they hold such a responsibility because I can tell you there is very important things happening every day that we never hear about because no matter what channel you're listening to, they're going to talk about Russian collusion for 4 hours. You know, what else happened today? What's going on in Israel and Pakistan? What's going on with all, you don't get the meat out of the media, and I think they're really doing a disservice.
Well, I would agree, and I used to, I always tell my kids, well, once upon a time, they used to have the news, and then when the news is over, you had Eric Severide come on and give you an opinion. What do you mean, Dad? Well, they'd report the facts, and then somebody would give an opinion about what they meant. Yeah. And they have a hard time getting their head around that because they've never seen that.
So we're getting close to wrapping up here, but one question I have for you is, how did you guys acquire such talent at WFG? And I haven't met everybody at WFG, but we sat down with Noah and we sat down with Justin and a lot of the local people here in Vancouver, and just the amount of talent and creativity and work ethic in those people that I've met is very impressive.
Well, they have ownership of what they do.
And how do you give people ownership?
Well, you listen to them, and if they have an idea, you give them the resources to run with it. Just simply, we've built this. We've had a great deal of success in a fairly short period of time because we have a lot of people who feel like they have the ability to execute on a good idea, and they do. So they have equity, they have intellectual and emotional equity in the company. It's their company. So.
Well, I think that really comes through from an affiliate that does business with them.
And I love harassing Noah. You probably picked that up. He's a bright guy and he cares. And we gave him last year. We said, okay, we have an annual leadership program, and we people all over the country recommend people in their operation to attend the leadership program. So we asked Noah to run the leadership program. Because thought he had ability. I had no idea. He did a phenomenal job. He really did, and he has a good future.
He's definitely become a person of influence, and that's if someday somebody could say that Ryan and I have been somewhat of an influence by doing this podcast, but he's been a big influence on me personally, just being a sounding board to run business and personal development ideas off of. And he's given a lot of opinion and help with just the podcast and been a champion for us. Made an introduction to you and a lot of other people, and so he's very honest about it, and he really is excited for what we're doing, and that support's awesome. You got anything else?
No, I appreciate the invite. Nice to spend some time with you guys, and I like, I'm going to just be straight up with you. I think you have a very good future because you're worried. It's the people that aren't worried that don't have a future. I made a joke earlier about I wake up every morning broke. I wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
I wake up every morning. I don't count what I have. Every morning I better accomplish something or the day wasn't a good day.
That's a lot easier said than done. In our industry, well, let me tell you where I'm coming from with that.
Okay.
Is because, 100% commission, you have great months, and you have really bad months, right?
No, but that's the end result. That's not what you're doing.
I know, but I find myself, I try to be level-headed, but it's really easy to think you're a badass when you're doing good and be scared when you're doing bad. It's that humility, which I think I'm fairly good at. I still struggle with a little bit. When you're having really good periods of success, financial success, it's hard to wake up and remind yourself that you were broke or at one point.
Let me, if I can, I'm going to suggest something here. You take it for what it's worth, okay? I always tell my managers, manage behavior, not results. If you take credit for results and you're managing results, they're already over, right? It's already done, right? So manage the behavior. So analyze what causes the success and manage that. If it's in sales, how many calls you're making a day? How are you selecting your targets? How are you getting in front of your targets? How do you achieve credit or credibility with your targets? Are you talking to 10 people a day? Are you talking to 15 people a day, 20 people a day? There's a direct correlation between your behavior and success. Every morning you're at zero. Every morning you're at zero, right? What are you going to do that day behavior-wise that will translate into success? You get paid by commissions, but it's really a function of your discipline on your behavior, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You can probably point to months you were very successful and you know exactly why. I'll bet you know exactly why.
Yeah. Well, and I realized that several years ago, right? And what I've learned too is that I'm a person that needs a lot of accountability. So I set that up.
Yeah.
Right. I have a coach and I have people that I want to hold me accountable on a specific task or on a goal or a long-term goal. And it's interesting because I got really high on accountability for a couple years. And I just thought, this is the greatest thing ever. Everybody needs accountability. One of the things we've learned by doing this podcast is a lot of people that are really successful, when I ask them that question, they say, you know what, I'm pretty self-accountable. So I think it was just me that needed the accountability.
No, I think everybody that, self-accountable, I think they're lying to themselves, truthfully. But I'll tell you one other thing that I do that, and I tell people this and they laugh at me. They don't think I'm serious, and I'm dead serious. I do a review of Pat Stone every Friday afternoon.
That's cool.
Yeah, I do. I sit down in my office, I close the door, and I say, okay, was this a good week? Was this a week you're proud of? Is this a week you accomplished something? Did you deal with your problems? You know what your problems are. Did you deal with them or did you run from them? And then I chew myself out pretty good when I don't think I have a good week. But I mean, it's your life, and if you don't use it, you're wasting it, right? Well, you got to work. You work. I work because I want to work. I work because I'm trying to build something, and I hold myself accountable to perform.
Yeah. And is it always those same metrics every Friday afternoon?
Sometimes I will get mad at myself because I didn't make enough sales calls. I mean, I try to do a lot of sales because I like it. And I actually learn more about what the clients are thinking by doing sales calls than I do by reading reports, right?
So as a CEO, you're making sales calls?
Yes, I make a lot of sales calls.
What kind of sales calls does a CEO make?
Well, people will say, I'm trying to recruit this person, or I'm trying to get this client, or I'm trying to get this lender, and I'll call up the CEO.
Nice.
So I'll do that. I make at least one every day.
Wow.
I make one every day, yeah. And, so I'll hold myself accountable for that. Or we have, I think, 1,240 employees right now. So there's always a major personnel problem somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. And inevitably, or a lot of times, the direct supervisor will be too close to the individual or will have a personal issue, right? So that they need to be dealt with, and I'll try to deal with them. And, I have a cardinal rule. You don't fire people without first giving them a chance to fix the problem. And you can't fix a problem unless you tell them what it is, right? So I do a lot of that. I'll say, hey, man, you're screwing up, say, hey, yeah, it impacts me, but it's impacting you more.
But when I've talked to people about you, they like that about you. They like being called out, and they like that.
Well, I think it helps make sure that I have an honest relationship with people. I often kid around with Justin Tucker. I often kid around him. I quit yelling at you. I'm mad at you. As long as I'm yelling at you, I still like you. But it's true. I mean, people.
He said the same thing.
Yeah, people appreciate you being honest with them. So I try to be real honest with people. So, yeah.
Good. Any tips for us?
Like what you're doing, I mean, I think you're going to get more and more opportunity to address things that concern people.
Good.
Yeah. And one comment here.
Wait, that's not good. That's not good.
Yeah, well, you're not completely slow. You picked up on that. But here's something I say all the time, and I drive people crazy with this. Every challenge is an opportunity. Whether it's bad economics, whether it's higher interest rates, whatever. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do a better job for the people that you work for than anybody else. I mean, you guys are in an industry that people need, and you do a good job for people. You help them get into a home. It doesn't get any better than that.
No.
So
yeah.
More power to you.
Yeah, and I think that that's more prevalent now than before the crash, as far as the quality of people and what's their why behind why they're in that industry.
Yep.
And I mean, we're in the service industry. We're here to help impact people's lives and direct them in the right way. And I think that there's more of us now than there used to be.
I would agree with that. Quality is much better.
Well, there we found a positive way to end
All
the
right,
podcast.
I liked it.
All right, thanks for coming on. Make sure you're subscribing and all that social media stuff. And
we'll be back soon.
We'll be back, hopefully from the side of the river.
Yeah.
I'll leave everyone with a hang, with a hanger there. All right, but see you next time.
My pleasure. Thank you.